Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna. This is episode number 257 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast for you filthy casual takes on the world of sports, for you filthy casual sports fans out there like you and me. And this episode is a new league year. Yes, it is, in the NFL, and that means some new faces in new places, and maybe some familiar faces in those familiar places with some new money, some new contracts, and some trades happening around the league as well. All that has been made official on the dotted line as, it's a new year. Yes, it is in the NFL, but not quite yet a new season of football. That happens much later down the line, but we got some new deals, some new trades, some familiar faces, all that stuff I already said. And we're here to round it all up, at least from what I've gathered so far in our NFL free agency 2025 frenzy roundup. So all the moves so far that's been going on. I'd say at least in the first part of free agency, it's been pretty crazy. It's been pretty crazy, especially with the trades and a couple of these free agency moves. After that, it's been, as expected, pretty quiet. But we'll get all into that with most of the teams that we're going to be discussing. So we're going to break it all down, and team by team, and what all these teams did in free agency so far, and what they didn't do. And talk about it here in this episode of the podcast. And then for those of you expecting the NFL season team recap month stuff, we'll be getting back into that into the next episode. We'll also be talking about some of the moves that we talked about in this episode in our team recaps for the teams that we will be covering in the next episodes, and the next episode, and the next episode for those team recaps. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Like I said, we'll be resuming our NFL team recap month for 2024 in the next episode and the other next sets as we wrap up the NFL team recaps in with the second half. Follow Very Cold Lasagna on social media at Very Cold Lasagna. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Oh, sorry, the X for Elon. Anyway. And then if you're listening to this Very Cold Lasagna podcast on whatever audio platform you're listening to it on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, make sure to continue to do so. Rate and review the show. It helps me so much. Try to improve the show in whatever way I possibly can. And then for those of you watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash the like button. And if you're not subscribed already, what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button. Turn on that notification bell. Comment down below with your takes on the topic at hand. In this case, the free agency moves that we're going to be discussing and your takes on them and what moves or the lack thereof that these teams should be making, the ones that we're going to be discussing. And as always, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbor, share this with some person out there, whether it's at work or school or wherever you're at. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast entitled Very Cold Lasagna. So that being said, enough dilly-dallying, enough stalling. Let's talk about NFL free agency as we begin the new league year in the NFL. So a lot of moves have already been made. A lot of things have been going on in the last couple of days around the NFL. So a lot has been going on. And the official season that hasn't even started yet. That's like 6 months down the line. The schedule hasn't even come out yet. The NFL draft is just a little over a month away still. Gosh, it certainly makes up for a very shitty WrestleMania build to Las Vegas right now. And yet, wrestling fans in the IWC and even casual wrestling fans are saying, wow, this is a really good road to WrestleMania when it clearly isn't. But that's we can have another side tangent on that if you guys want to. But when it comes to this free agency, blows the water yet again with this WrestleMania build. So let's talk about some of these moves that have been happening around the league in each division with almost every team, because not every team has made a significant move. And we're not going to get into every single move because we'd be here forever and ever and ever. And what it honestly means for some of these teams, in my opinion. So we begin our venture into NFL free agency. So far, at least, it's only the first week, so there's bound to be more moves, whether it's minor or major. And we begin our journey with the AFC East, starting with the team at the top, the Buffalo Bills. So they started out free agency by releasing edge rusher Von Miller. Yeah, he was old. He's getting on the older side anyway, and he didn't really live up to that big fat contract right after leaving the LA Rams. Now, granted, he tore his ACL in that same season. He signed on from the Rams to the Bills, coming off that Super Bowl win with LA, which was unfortunate, and he just never really recovered when it came to his play. So it was unfortunate, and his role declined into a more of a role player, and now he's gone. They didn't lose anybody of note so far, like anyone major. So they did re-sign a couple of people, gave some extensions, most notably to Josh Allen, gave him this big fat new contract. The number is around $330 million, which deservedly so. It's a lot of money though, but at least he plays like he's earned it. I mean, he did win the MVP this past season after all. He's basically been putting the team on his back for the last 3 seasons and more and counting. And he'll probably continue to do so until they can get him some damn help. But yeah, he's earned that money. He's earned that big fat contract. Just get him some damn help though. They also handed out big fat contract extensions to edge rusher Gregory Rousseau and linebacker Terrell Bernard, 2 key pieces of the defense. Rousseau being a key piece of that front 4 that stays on, but again, could still use some help in that pass rush with Von Miller now gone. So yeah, all 3 of those guys deserve their contract extensions. They did trade away one of their players on defense, but not really one of note. Corner Khair Alam and a 6th-round pick to the Dallas Cowboys in return for some draft picks. So Alam, I remember they drafted him. I think it was 2023 or 2022 that they drafted him, and yeah, he was a major bust. He didn't play all that much in his rookie year, and then yeah, did he ever start a game for the Bills? I'm not sure. Someone can comment on that. But he had trouble staying healthy, and he really struggled when he saw the field for Buffalo. But maybe a fresh start could help him out in Jerry world. So there were some notable new signings for the Bills, mainly when it came to rotational players like Joey Bosa from the Chargers when he got released to a 1-year deal. Now, Joey Bosa hasn't had a fully healthy season in a long while. He passed up a chance to play with his brother in San Francisco in order for a chance to get a ring with Josh Allen. And when healthy, he can provide a boost to a Bills pass rushing rotation that, could still use some help. Meanwhile, on the offense, they got receiver Josh Palmer from the Chargers to a 3-year deal. I'm not sure why exactly they give him that much money for a player that's very inconsistent. And he had a lot of drops, just like with Quentin Johnson, I believe it was. I'm sorry, I'm bad with names, but yeah, the other Chargers receiver that was so bad with drops too in key moments. So I'm not sure why exactly they overpaid Josh Palmer. So either way, the main takeaway from the Bills so far is keeping all their core guys intact and getting some key guys on defense at a modest price, mainly rotational guys. Meanwhile, for the Miami Dolphins, going down this list for the AFC East, nothing of note so far. They released running back Raheem Mostert. They didn't re-sign anybody, but they did get a few notable new signees, new additions like receiver Nick Westbrook-Akine from the Titans, which is kind of a big loss for the Titans, in my opinion. So Tua, I believe he gets a solid complementary weapon alongside Jalen Waddle, and if he decides to stick around, Tyreek Hill. And then Tua also gets a new backup quarterback in Zach Wilson. So Zach Wilson is back in the AFC East again, as an insurance policy in case Tua gets hurt. Hopefully he doesn't get hurt again this coming season. So it just in case of emergency break glass situation, Zach Wilson will be there. And who knows, maybe he can finally do something. Meanwhile, for the New York Jets, Zach Wilson's old team, they finally did the expected. They released Aaron Rodgers officially, and so they also released Devontae Adams as expected as well. Some notable people that was let go in free agency moved on to other teams. Morgan Moses, the tackle, edge rusher Hassan Reddick, and defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. So some notable losses there, but they were expected to move on from them anyway. They re-signed linebacker Jermaine Sherwood to a 3-year deal, and who was a free agent, but they managed to keep their top linebacker and fulfilled one of their pressing needs prior to the start of free agency. However, news recently came out that they released one of their other top linebackers. I believe the name is CJ Mosley. Yeah. They released their other top linebackers in CJ Mosley. And I'm just like, that's a curious case of why. Like, why would release a key piece of their front seven? I'm not sure. Maybe like they couldn't come to an agreement on an extension or a new contract. But not good. Not good for the Jets. Meanwhile, they do have a new quarterback in town, and that name is Justin Fields, to a 2-year deal. So the Jets are weirdly paying big money for Fields. It's a 2-year, $40 million contract. That's a lot of money to be the starting quarterback for a QB that has been But regardless, we don't know if he's going to be starting just yet, because who knows if the Jets are going to go into the draft and maybe go on day 2 or day 3 and find a quarterback that will compete with Justin Fields for the starting job. But regardless, they're moving on to a brand new quarterback. Meanwhile, for the Patriots, they've had a very active offseason so far, very active free agency. When it comes to adding new people, especially on defense, they added Harold Landry from the Tennessee Titans, who was released by the team, got a brand new 3-year deal, returns to his old head coach, Mike Vrabel. So familiarity on both sides, and on a side of the ball that really needs some help at that position with Harold Landry and Christian Barmore. The two Christians I get confused with. So Christian Barmore in that front four, get some help. And also getting some help for Barmore and Landry is defensive lineman Milton Williams from the Philadelphia Eagles. So coming off that Super Bowl win with that Philly pass rush, he goes over to New England to help them out to a big, fat 4-year deal. So the Pats get an even major boost to help out Barmore and Harold Landry. And Williams, he was a major force for Philadelphia in the last 2 seasons, and he gets rewarded with this big, fat deal. And then you have linebacker Robert Spillane from the Raiders. And I think this is a nice addition to a front seven that badly needs help in the middle. Spillane was pretty good, generating some turnovers, very good tackler. And I actually like this move by the Patriots. You also get corner Carlton Davis from the Lions to a 3-year deal. A little bit of an overpay, in my opinion. But when he was on the field for Detroit last season, he was decent. But he missed their late stretch with a jaw fracture. But as long as he can stay healthy, alongside Christian Gonzalez, I believe he could still be a solid pass defender. And he presents a veteran presence in that secondary. So moving on from the AFC East, we move over to the other eastern side, and that is the NFC East. And we look at the Philadelphia Eagles, and man, they lost a bunch of players on defense. But we'll get into that in just a second. because they did release. Actually, when we look at that defense, that's where those losses begin, because they released their veteran corners, James Bradbury and Darius Slay. Darius Slay and Bradbury, they're on the older side anyway. So, and they already have their younger replacements anyway. So it was to be expected, but still sucked for them. Some of the notable free agency losses, I already talked about them. Milton Williams moved on to the Patriots. Josh Sweat moved on to Arizona, respectively. There are a bunch more on the list, but it's still kind of lengthy. Some people that they re-signed included linebacker Zach Bond, who was a key piece in the interior front seven, so he stays on at a solid deal. They rewarded Saquon Barkley with his own 2-year big fat extension, making him the highest paid running back in the NFL. So he was pretty much the engine of the offense last season. In his first year in Philly, he gets rewarded with this big fat extension, and rightfully so, to be honest with you. The Eagles did make some trades to counteract the lack of signings that they haven't made yet. And that included getting a new backup quarterback in Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th-round pick from the Cleveland Skidmarks, a.k.a. the Browns. In return, they traded away Kenny Pickett. So, yeah, the Browns went out of their way to go and get Kenny Pickett via trade because, well, they're not going to have Deshaun Watson probably for all of 2025. So might as well go and find yourself a quote-unquote Super Bowl winning quarterback, backup at least, in Kenny Pickett. Meanwhile, the Eagles weren't done there yet in the trade market because they went on to get guard Kenyon Green and next year's 5th-round pick from the Houston Texans in return for trading away C.J. Gardner-Johnson and next year's 6th-round pick. So this adds some depth to the offensive line for Philadelphia. But also, they're giving away C.J. Gardner-Johnson, one of their top safeties, but also a mark for himself. He's what I mean by mark, well, he's one of those with an ego, pretty much. Like it's like the wrestling term, a mark. A mark, pretty much, in over their head, pretty much. So for the Eagles, yeah, they lost a lot of players on like their key players from their Super Bowl winning season. And if we know Howie Roseman, at least from outsiders, even from an outsider's perspective, he's one of the best GMs in the NFL. I can at least give credit to that. So I can at least expect him to use this draft to replenish that strong defense. Looking at the Washington Commanders down below, they did make a couple moves of their own to try and bolster their needs. They did release top defensive tackle Jonathan Allen after not being able to trade him away. They did try to do something to trade him to some team, but we'll get into that in a bit. The only notable loss they had in free agency was De'Ami Brown at receiver, but other than that was pretty much it. They re-signed tight ends John Bates and Zach Ertz. Bates wasn't used all that much compared to Zach Ertz in their deep playoff run, but maybe that changes going into this fall as Zach Ertz gets a year older. They also re-signed Bobby Wagner to a 1-year deal. Wagner is on the older side of things, but he is still very reliable in the middle of the field, whether as a run stopper or as a pass defender in that mid-range passing game. So going back to Jonathan Allen, because he was involved in a major trade, right, like a week or 2 weeks before the start of the new league year. So the Commanders, they made a big move to go and get receiver Deebo Samuel from my San Francisco 49ers. And they got themselves, in return, a 5th-round pick. So they initially tried to do a player swap with the 49ers, at least. They tried to do a player swap with Deebo and Jonathan Allen, but I guess the Niners just didn't want to pay Jonathan Allen that big, fat contract. So Jonathan Allen's on a different team now. We'll discuss which one that is. But, Deebo's days could be behind him, but it still could be a valuable asset to Jane Daniels if Cliff Kingsbury can use his wide back set, him as a running back and then him as a receiver. For those of you who are familiar with Deebo Samuel's skill set, you know what I mean. They weren't done in the trade market, though, because they traded for left tackle Laramie Tunsil from the Houston Texans and a 4th-round pick in this year's draft in return for giving the Texans this year's 3rd and 7th-round picks and next year's couple of draft picks. Now, again, it was interesting that the Texans were willing to trade away when their top left tackle, their starting left tackle, mind you, even though he's one of the older left tackles in the NFL and he had trouble staying healthy last year, but he's still very reliable. And this is exactly what the Commanders needed on an offensive line that's still kind of shaky. But, this is a starting foundation for them. One of the notable signings for Washington was defensive lineman Javon Kinlaw, albeit an overpaid 3-year deal for decent production. Kinlaw was a rotational player for the Jets last year, but I get what they're trying to do, try to bolster that defensive line, but again, an overpay because they still need more help than that. So the Commanders, some solid stuff for them. This so far in free agency, making some big aggressive moves to try and help out Jane Daniels, both in the passing game and some protection up front. But still some work to do, especially on defense. Looking at the Dallas Cowboys, not a very active offseason so far, although at least it's a little bit more compared to last offseason where they practically did nothing. They lost a couple players via free agency, or in the case of Zach Martin, their guard, retirement. One of those players being edge rusher DeMarcus Lawrence and running back Rico Dowdle. They re-signed a couple of their key players like corner CJ Goodwin to a 1-year deal, solid man corner, and then return specialist Cavante Turbin to a 3-year deal, which I thought was a very justifiable signing by Jerry Jones, re-signing by Jerry Jones. Because he was one of his best players on special teams. I mean, other than Brendan Aubrey, that 1-2 punch I talked about. And then they were also very active in the trade market because they trade for, like I said, corner Khair Elam from the Bills. So, like I said, Elam was a bust for the Bills, but maybe this change in scenery, change in scheme in Dallas could help him out. And then they also trade for linebacker Kenneth Murray Jr. From the Titans. I didn't even know he was there in Tennessee. And a 7th-round pick from Tennessee in return for this year's 6th-round pick. So another rotational linebacker, so we'll see what happens there. The only new signing that they had so far was getting a new running back in Javonte Williams from Denver to a 1-year deal. Now, Williams' performance, it faltered hard in the last 2 years. He tore his ACL in 2022, and he is never the same player since then. So maybe a changing system could help him rediscover some of his old form. Now, he's probably never going to get that old form back like he did back prior to 2022. But who knows? Maybe at least some of it will. Now, looking at the New York Giants, they're a kind of active team in the free agency period so far. They re-signed Darius Slayton to a 3-year deal. He was an okay receiver. He also received some offers out there, but ultimately stayed in the Big Apple. But he better hope his next quarterback will be good to help out Slayton and Malik Neighbors. Some new signings included corner Paulson Adebo from the Saints to a 3-year deal. He was the Saints' second top corner alongside Kool-Aid McKinstry. So the Giants' gain is the Saints' loss. And yeah, definitely a big get for a Giants passing defense that was really bad last year. And also another addition to that Giants passing defense is safety Javon Holland from the Dolphins. And that's another major get. So yeah, some decent moves for the Giants so far in free agency. I know it's not a lot, but when it comes to their passing defense, some good moves right there. So going on to the AFC North, starting with the Ravens, not a whole lot has been going on because of the limited money that they had, but some things that you need to know. They re-signed left tackle Ronnie Stanley, who is a key piece of their offensive line. Stanley stays on to protect Lamar Jackson on the left side. And they signed receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Chiefs to a 1-year deal. And Hopkins is pretty much on his last legs in the NFL, looking for a championship. But you look at the receiver room, with Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. I'm not sure if Nelson Aguilar is still there, but if he's not there, then Hopkins will probably replace him. But it also includes Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. Getting pretty crowded over there. Meanwhile, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're also not very active in this free agency period so far either, but they did make a major move, and that was a major trade. And that was trading this year's second-round pick to the Seattle Seahawks in return for one DK Metcalf. So they finally go out of their way to go and get some help, or maybe not some help, for George Pickens. So now they have a 1-2 punch at receiver. But the question is, who's going to be the quarterback to throw them the ball? So this is a very good trade for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now the question becomes, who's going to be the quarterback to throw that ball to? Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? Who knows? By the time this episode gets uploaded. Meanwhile, for the Cincinnati Bengals, they were kind of active also in free agency. They released guard Alex Kappa, and rightfully so, one of the worst guards in the NFL last year. They re-signed a couple of key players like tight end Mike Gesicki. He caught on midway last year when he stepped up as Joe Burrow's main target, as Jamar Chase was being double covered by opposing defenses, and T. Higgins missed time with an injury. So Gesicki really stepped up in a big way for Joe Burrow. Speaking of T. Higgins, he got franchise tagged, and we'll see whether or not he'll want to play under another tag, which comes at a costly $26 million. They also re-signed defensive lineman B.J. Hill to a 3-year deal, a key piece of their pass rush returns, although he's going to need a lot of help with the retirement of Sam Hubbard and Trey Henderson requesting and being granted a trade out of Cincinnati. So they haven't really made a lot of moves when it comes to filling up that defensive line. And Cincinnati is going to have to start making those moves if they want to, bolster up that defense. And they haven't made any yet. So looking at the skid marks, they released Dalvin Tomlinson, whose performance has declined over the last couple of seasons. Looking at some of the extensions that they made, probably one of the most talked about to kick off the free agency period was Myles Garrett. Yeah, who saw this coming? Edge rusher Myles Garrett, who requested a trade, I believe, for like a month before or 2 months before this whole period started, like right after the season, right after the regular season ended. He requested a trade, and he wanted out. He wanted to go to a playoff contender, but back he comes around and gets a big fat contract extension. Yeah. He decides to end his trade request to stick around with a team that has no clear Super Bowl aspirations, let alone playoff aspirations, because it's all about the money. It's all about the money. Yeah. Despite, his clear intentions of wanting to get traded to go to a team that, has Super Bowl aspirations. Yeah, good job, Myles. Good job. You just dug your grave for the future for the money. Yeah, skid mark for life. They did make a trade, like I mentioned, with the Eagles. They traded away Dorian Thompson-Robinson in this year's 5th round pick to Philadelphia. In return, they got Kenny Pickett. For, like I said, with when I talked about the Eagles, on the Browns side of things, Kenny Pickett will have a chance to compete for the starting job against whoever's the Browns get in the draft. So, yeah, whoever wins that starting job, whether it's Kenny Pickett or that new quarterback that the Browns are going to draft, because, well, Deshaun Watson's not going to do it, going to be there. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Browns. They didn't really do anything notable because, well, they can't do anything notable because they don't have any money to do anything notable. Looking at the NFC North side of things, we look at what the Lions did so far in free agency. They released edge rusher Zadarius Smith, and it's kind of unfortunate how his performance kind of dipped this past season, which sucked. And he also dealt with an injury as well. They re-signed left tackle Dan Skipper to a 1-year deal. Jared Goff's key protector on the outside sticks around for 1 more year on that very strong O-line, but they did lose in free agency Kevin Zeitler to the Tennessee Titans. I believe it's Kevin Zeitler. It was one of their starting offensive linemen from last year. Can't remember the name, but they recently lost him to the Titans most recently this past week. One of their new signings include corner DJ Reed from the Jets on a 3-year deal. There was a major bidding war for DJ Reed, and the Lions came out on top. And he was one of the top corners for Gang Green, other than Sauce Gardner, of course. He did very well for them, and the Lions get some much-needed help for a passing defense that got brutalized with injuries last year. And, well, hopefully that's not the case going to this fall. And I think DJ Reed could be a good answer for neutralizing that. Looking at the Minnesota Vikings, some of the action that's going on over there during this period, well, the big question was, what were they going to do with Sam Darnold and that quarterback situation? Well, it turns out they let him go. They let Sam Darnold go. They let him go to the Emerald City. They also let Daniel Jones go to the site of a future WrestleMania, a future SummerSlam, and one that recently hosted a Royal Rumble. So they let almost their entire quarterback room go. Pretty much. That included Nick Mullins, pal. They did re-sign a couple people like Aaron Jones to a 2-year deal. Jones had some consistency issues this past season, especially with taking care of the football. But maybe the Vikings draft another running back as Jones' backup, to groom him up and maybe supplant Jones as the starting running back. They also re-signed corner Byron Murphy to a 3-year deal. I thought he was fine last season, but just like with everyone else in that cornerback room, he was getting torched, given that he had no help. Some of their new signs centered around the offensive line for J.J. McCarthy as they clearly transition into his era. Like Ryan Kelly from the Colts. He is a very good center for Indy during his time there, but he dealt with the injury bug the last season or two. So hopefully he can stay healthy this coming season. Also coming over from the Colts is Will Fries to a big, fat 5-year contract. A bit of an overpay since he dealt with injuries too, but just like with Ryan Kelly, a key piece of that once solid Colts offensive line. So hopefully with the turnover in this Vikings offensive line that also includes Christian Darrisaw, who is coming off a torn ACL. This offensive line, if they add a couple more pieces, unless they're content with what they have, it will be very firm, very strong for their second-year quarterback that still has a lot to prove, having not played any actual NFL action yet, regular season wise. They also, on the other side, they stuck to the trenches, signing over defensive tackle Jonathan Allen once he got released to a 3-year deal, and Javon Hargrave from my 49ers to a 2-year deal. So they emphasized the trenches. So I liked what the Vikings did here, although we'll see what everyone brings to the table. Looking at the Packers, they focused on I'd say they're basically their needs, their positional needs as well. Like guard Aaron Banks from the 49ers on a big fat 4-year deal. He's a very decent starting guard, but I'm not sure why the Packers overpaid, gave him that much, given that he's had issues staying healthy the last 2 seasons. And I just hope though his fortunes will change and will be able to protect Jordan Love in the interior. You also look at corner Nate Hobbs from the Raiders on a 4-year deal. I think he was a very solid corner for them during his time in Vegas. So he should be able to help the Packers secondary, which struggled a lot, whether or not Jair Alexander was in the lineup. They also re-signed kicker Brandon McManus to a 3-year deal. So the Packers seem to have found their reliable man in the special teams after, that disaster a couple years ago with Anders Carlson, especially in that playoff game. Meanwhile, for the Bears probably had other than the Patriots, had the most active free agency. They didn't lose anybody notable, which is always a good thing. I talked about with the Bears, like you can pretty much let anybody go. They didn't release anybody, until at least not right now. They didn't re-sign anybody, which again there wasn't really anyone worth re-signing right now. But they did make some big trades. And that was the beginning of a very aggressive offseason for Chicago. And that was centered around the offensive line. They traded for Jonah Jackson of the Rams, and they traded for Joe Thuney of the Chiefs, both at the guard spot. So both of those cost 6-round picks for next year's draft, respectively. So not too bad as a return for the Bears. Some day 3 picks for that they had to give away for the Bears. So as long as Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson perform well, and they can stay healthy for that offensive line and protecting Caleb Williams, I think on paper right now, this offensive line has gotten much better for Chicago. And it gets even better for the Bears, too, when you get to who they actually signed during the free agency period. Getting center Drew Dalman from the Falcons to a 3-year deal and pretty much outbidding everybody else out there. One of the best centers in the NFL and highly sought after. The Bears won the bidding war and rounded out their new look interior O-line. It's going to have Dalman, Thuney, Jackson. They should fare much better in protecting Caleb next fall. And who knows? Who knows what else they're going to get to protect Caleb up front. Now, when you look at their draft, it's pretty much BPA, best player available for them, or maybe they can trade down from their 10th, 9th, or 10th overall pick that they have. Looking at the AFC South, the Texans probably, I'm not sure what to think of what the Texans are doing, but we'll talk about them later again as well, because I have some things to say about them. They released guard Shaq Mason because, he is on the older side, and so it's kind of fair. They re-signed defensive linemen Sheldon Rankins, Mario Edwards, and Derek Barnett, each to 1-year deals. Just fine, rotational linemen. But this was probably the most questionable thing that the Texans have done so far, and it's still pretty early. They traded away their top offensive lineman, their left tackle Laramie Tunsil, to Washington, as I talked about earlier, and which is pretty weird. And I talked about earlier, they traded away guard Kenyon Green for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I'm not really understanding why the Texans would do that unless they have a plan to replace them in the draft. But all I can think, I don't know. Trading away your top left tackle, it's probably the biggest questionable thing out of all of this. Especially considering that CJ Stroud got sacked a lot, especially late in the season. It's like Nick Caserio better be thinking offensive line when the Texans have their first pick in next month's draft. But they weren't done in the trade market just yet, because they traded for receiver Christian Kirk from the Jaguars in return for next year's 7th-round pick. And I was a little surprised that they did an in-division trade, that they would do business with each other. But Christian Kirk, regardless, he's a solid fill-in alongside Nico Collins, because Tank Dell's not going to be there all next season because of that brutal leg injury he suffered in the Christmas game. Stephon Diggs probably not going to be brought back as of right now. So, yeah, I think Christian Kirk will be a fine number 2 alongside Nico Collins. So for the Indianapolis Colts, on the other hand, they lost Ryan Kelly and Wolf Rise, two of their key offensive linemen. No notable re-signings for them. So a pretty quiet offseason for the land of Indy, other than getting a key piece for their secondary that got gashed last year. And that was corner Charvarius Ward from my 49ers. Ward, he gets the fresh start that he's looking for after last season's mental drain, all that dark cloud stuff that he was suffering to, like all that tragic events that was happening in his life. So I wish him all the best. I really do wish him all the best going forward in this next chapter on his next team. And he'll be a big boost for that Colts secondary that really struggled last year. And there's another move that they made so far, and that was getting a quarterback. They got a quarterback, and that quarterback was Daniel Jones to a 1-year deal. So he's the latest backup for Shane Steichen. But this one's probably more intriguing because it puts pressure on Anthony Richardson. Probably the most pressure on Anthony Richardson because Richardson, like I talked about in that season recap, it's probably like a warning sign that he could be unseated as the starter because he's been very 50-50, probably 40-60, 30-70 in his 2 years over there. So if he doesn't break out and if he doesn't improve drastically this coming season, and Daniel Jones, he does make some noise if he has to be put in the starting role, then look out Anthony Richardson. You are in danger. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They made a couple moves like releasing Devin Duvernay at receiver and tight end Evan Ingram, which was pretty surprising in my opinion. They didn't lose anyone of note in free agency so far, which I guess is good. They didn't really have anyone worth keeping around. Like I said, they traded away Christian Kirk to the Texans in an in-division trade. They made a few notable moves, like Jordan Lewis from the Colts to a 3-year deal. Not sure if it's an overpay or not, but that remains to be seen. They also got receiver De'Ami Brown to a 1-year deal. Decent rotational receiver for Trevor Lawrence, but other than that, relatively quiet offseason for the land of all elite so far. The Titans, they released edge rusher Harold Landry and moved on to the Patriots, like I talked about when I talked about New England at the very beginning of this episode. And I'm not sure why they didn't make an attempt to re-sign receiver Nick Westbrook-Akine. I thought he did pretty good for Tennessee, despite that pretty poor season for them as a whole. But he was like one of the shining lights for the Titans in the last 2 seasons. But not sure why they weren't able to keep him or try to make an attempt to keep him. But nonetheless, they did make a few nice signings to help out both sides of the ball, like Dan Moore from the Steelers to a big fat 4-year deal to try and bolster that offensive line, and linebacker Cody Barton from the Broncos to bolster that front 7. So some decent moves for the Titans. But again, the most important question is, what are you going to do to adjust the quarterback position in the draft? So pretty much all eyes are still on there. Meanwhile, down in the other side of the South, and that is the NFC South, we start with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Not really much of note for them other than some re-signings and extensions like Chris Godwin. So Chris Godwin stays on for the Bucks despite how his season ended last year. I mean, he still is the second most important receiver to Baker Mayfield behind Mike Evans. So he keeps the core for the Bucks stays together. Him, Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield. I just hope Todd Bowles just better not have him out there during garbage time where the Bucks are getting their asses blown out and, well, he suffers another season-ending injury. Like, Bowles better be smarter than that next time, okay? They also re-signed linebacker Lavonte David to another 1-year deal. And while he is on the older side, he's still a very important piece to the defense. So he sticks around as well. Meanwhile, for the Atlanta Falcons, as they enter an offseason where they're trying to help around their new starting quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., even though they're keeping Kirk Cousins for some reason, but nonetheless, they released top defensive tackle Grady Jarrett, who moves on to the Minnesota Vikings. Is it the Vikings or no? It's the I don't remember. They did lose Drew Dalman at center, like I talked about with the Bears. They did sign on a couple of key people, like edge rusher Leonard Floyd from my 49ers, and they literally picked them out hours after the Niners released them. And it helps the exterior front four, given Floyd can stay healthy and produce, but they also have to continue to address the front four, given that they released Grady Jarrett, their top producer, formerly. They also got linebacker Divine Diablo from the Raiders, who is a solid pickup for the Falcons' short field passing defense that has struggled in the last season or two. Meanwhile, for the Saints, relatively quiet offseason, as expected, because, well, they're in cap hell. They have been in cap hell for who knows how long. So they didn't really do much. But surprisingly, they managed to make two big moves, and that was re-signing Chase Young to a 3-year deal, and signing safety Justin Reed from the Chiefs to a 3-year deal. So he rejoins Tyrann Mathieu this time in the big hard. So yeah, that's pretty much all they did. Meanwhile, for the Carolina Panthers, they actually released Miles Sanders, the running back. I remember he was signed to this big fat contract a month after Super Bowl 57 when they lost to the Chiefs, when he was with the Eagles. So he signs this big fat contract, but man, did he flop hard in Carolina. And when Chuba Hubbard had this breakout season last year, and then pretty much when he was named the starter after Miles Sanders flopped, well, Miles Sanders was made expendable. Looking at the re-signings that the Panthers had, well, they re-signed J.C. Horn to a big fat 4-year extension after having the best season of his career last year. Although $100 million, though, to make him the highest paid corner, that's a lot. That's really a lot for just one good season. But I'm hoping that he's able to maintain it, given that he's still relatively young. He's got a lot of potential for. I remember evaluating him too. Evaluating in air quotes, because hey, I'm a filthy casual man. But yeah, I'm still hoping he's able to produce and just stay healthy, because he's got a lot of potential for his age. Other than that, not really much for the Carolina Panthers as we close out the NFC South and move on to the last two divisions. The AFC West, starting with the reigning and defending AFC champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, who are getting purged hard right now with losing a couple people, a lot of key people right now, like DeAndre Hopkins and Justin Reed, and like I said, having to trade away to keep offensive linemen like Joe Thuney, and yeah, just making a lot of difficult decisions in general. Some of the people that they re-signed was like Marquise Hollywood Brown to a 1-year deal, and linebacker Nick Bolton. So they did manage to keep a couple of key people around. They also franchise tagged Trey Smith, who signed the tag. Some new people that have come along are corner Christian Fulton from the Chargers, who should be a nice rotational piece for their cornerback room. And then offensive lineman Jalen Moore from the 49ers. It's a bit of an overpay, but he did a solid job filling in for Trent Williams in the back half of last season. So let's see what he can do if he gets a chance to start at tackle. For the LA Chargers, they released, as expected, Joey Bosa, who moves on to the Bills. They did lose Fulton and defensive lineman Poona Ford. We'll talk about what the exact team was they lost Poona Ford to, because I found it very interesting. They did re-sign edge rusher Khalil Mack to a 1-year deal, so a key part of that front seven stays on, and on the opposite side, center Bradley Bozeman stays on. So yeah, pretty much some familiarity for the Chargers. They do get a new running back in Najee Harris from the Steelers. Although he wasn't the most productive back, the best ability that Najee Harris had was availability. Harris was always there. So that's something that the Chargers can count on. So this will be his chance to prove that he can be a productive back in a new environment. Corner, they also got corner Dante Jackson from the Steelers. He was okay after being traded from Carolina last season. But just pretty much further indicates that, yeah, both the Chargers and Asante Samuel Jr. are moving on from each other, especially after they extended Elijah Molden as well. For the Denver Broncos, they also had an active offseason. Other than losing linebacker Cody Barton, they re-signed defensive tackle DJ Jones to a 3-year deal. Probably one of the more underrated players in the run defense for Denver last season. So it made sense for him to stick around. Probably where Denver really stood out in this free agency period was their signings for the defense. And that was, it hurts my heart so much. They got some players from the 49ers. Linebacker Dre Greenlaw and safety Talanoa Hufanga. And man, does this hurt. But especially, Greenlaw. But when they're healthy, Greenlaw and Hufanga are very strong playmakers. And, I just hope Denver can take good care of them. And I just hope both of them can produce in the mile high. That's all I can tell them. That's all I can tell Denver fans. They also signed tight end Evan Ingram to a 2-year deal. Surprisingly released by the Jaguars for some reason. Denver's gain is the Jaguars' loss because Ingram is going to provide some very nice help that the Broncos have been looking for at tight end. So a little surprising that, again, the Jaguars released him. Meanwhile, for the Raiders, they've been having some very interesting decisions. I mean, it was expected that, other than being expected, that Gardner Minshew was being released as they searched for a new quarterback. But speaking of quarterback, you'd think that they would go and draft a quarterback, and maybe they still will draft a quarterback. Nah, I don't know. They decided to instead, go and trade for a quarterback, and not just any quarterback. They go and make a deal with the Seahawks, Pete Carroll's old stomping grounds, and go and trade a 3rd-round pick for Geno Smith. Yeah, Geno Smith. So they go and get a so-so quarterback in Geno and reunite him with Pete Carroll. And Geno has much lesser weapons around him. Now, they can focus on that in the draft, but it's just like, you're just delaying the Raiders are just delaying the inevitable again. It's like, oh my goodness. Like, you think that, with like adding on Tom Brady, adding on Pete Carroll, like Mark Davis would know better. But no, it's still the same old Raiders. Still the same old Raiders. It's like, oh, Lordy Lord. And you think that someone that would also be smarter is Max Crosby. Max Crosby, who was rumored to want a trade out at some point. He put those trade rumors to bed and also put to bed his chances of winning a Super Bowl because, money, and a terrible WrestleMania build to that as well. So anyway, they also signed guard Alex Kappa to a 2-year deal. And yeah, they went out to sign one of the worst guards in the NFL. But maybe, a fresh start could help him out, turn his reputation around. But we'll see. But so far, not exactly the best start for the Raiders with their new head coach and Pete Carroll and their new GM, John Spytek. Maybe he is a spy for somewhere. Ugh. Either way, not a good start for them. Now moving on to the last division after this lengthy roundup. The LA Rams. They've had a kind of active offseason so far. They expectedly released Cooper Kupp. And this is bound to be the case. He is an expected casualty. His play declined the last 2 seasons with the emergence of Cooper Kupp, and then Kupp and the Rams tried to find a trade partner, but they couldn't. And, the Devontae Adams signing, it just, furthered the inevitable. It just sped up the inevitable. So Cooper Kupp, now a free agent as we speak. And now it's just on Kupp of which team will go out and sign him. So looking at some of the re-signings and extensions for the Rams, Matthew Stafford, after it was initially rumored, after the Rams let him seek some options out there of, a trade with the Raiders and the Giants aggressively pursuing him, reportedly. But Matthew Stafford was smarter than that. Matthew Stafford decided to stay in LA on a restructured deal. And, both sides were smart to come together and stick around with each other. They also re-signed offensive lineman Alaric Jackson to a 3-year deal. So one of Stafford's key offensive linemen stays on. And so does good old backup quarterback Jimmy G, which is fine, given the event that Stafford gets hurt again. But whatever happened to the other quarterback? I forgot his name. The one they drafted a couple years ago. Whatever happened to him? So like I said, they also got receiver Devontae Adams. The move came after he was released by the Jets, and he comes in as the replacement for Cooper Kupp. But yeah, it's a big fat 2-year deal. But yeah, that's the only thing that's an overpay. And going back to Poona Ford, yeah, he literally is not going anywhere. He's just coming over to the other side of Los Angeles, and which comes as a little bit of a surprise. I mean, yet you're just staying in LA, just on the other side of it. But he moves over to the other side of LA to bolster up an already rising Rams front four, which is good for him, I guess. Now, looking at the Seahawks, oh boy, there's a lot of change going on in the Emerald City. Like, when you look at this extensive list of what's going on in Seattle, they released the likes of Tyler Lockett. They released George Fant. They released defensive lineman Jonathan Hackins, edge rusher Draymond Jones, and safety Rayshon Jenkins, which, for the most part, it was expected. But one of the surprising ones was Tyler Lockett. And then, of course, I talked about the trade for Geno Smith to the Raiders for that 3rd-round pick. And I also talked about it in the end of that Seahawks recap video, which I had to put in once, a day after I recorded that, because that was breaking news. Seattle had to make a tough choice to make because of Geno's cap hit in that last year of his deal. And they elected to trade him to Vegas because because it's their problem now. But now the thing was, the Hawks are going to have to find a new quarterback. But they weren't quite done there yet. They managed to find that said quarterback. But we'll talk about that in just a bit, because they weren't done in the trade market. Because they also, like I said, they also traded away DK Metcalf to the Steelers for the 2nd-round pick for this upcoming draft. So not only do you give away your starting quarterback, you give away your top receiver in Metcalf, who signed a big fat 5-year extension with the Steelers. So they expectedly traded away Metcalf. They surprisingly released Tyler Lockett, as well as traded away Geno. So now the Hawks have to find 2 new receivers for the new quarterback. Speaking of the new quarterback, they signed Sam Darnold of the Vikings to this big fat 3-year deal. The 3-year deal is kind of similar to Baker Mayfield's 3 years, $100 million. So it's it's an overpay in my opinion. But at least with Baker Mayfield, he's living up to that contract. So we don't know yet for Sam Darnold. So at least right now, the Hawks get the quarterback that they wanted, and Darnold cashes in on his best season of his career, despite how it ended in the playoffs, ironically, against the team that he'll now have to play against twice next season and going forward. But we'll see how Sam Darnold does in the coming fall, because yeah, it'll be interesting how things play out, despite not having any receivers right now other than Jackson Smith and the Jigba. Look at the final 2 teams that we have to talk about, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. So far, not really much happening other than re-signing guard Evan Brown, keeping a rotational piece of Arizona's O-line around. And then you have edge rusher Baron Browning to a 2-year deal, keeping one of their starting defensive linemen on the other side of the trenches around. But probably one of their bigger signings, one of their only bigger signings right now, is edge rusher Josh Sweat. So Sweat reunites with Jonathan Gannon and beefs up a defensive line that really needed help around Darius Robinson, Browning, and Zayvon Collins. So they actually have a solid front four. That's right now in Arizona. So they just need to work on that passing defense, though. Meanwhile, what a way to end this episode. My San Francisco 49ers. If there wasn't a team that has been absolutely bleeding right now, it's this one. My 49ers. And you look at the people that they either had to let go or they lost in free agency. It's this team, man. It's like a mass exodus. And some of it was expected. A lot of it had to be done. But, it still hurts. It still really hurts as a fan. Because especially considering that they failed to finish the story twice. They had 2 chances to finally win title number 6 with this core. Now and then they couldn't. And now Jed York, Parag Morate, and John Lynch, they have to shed the fat. They're approaching this with a new philosophy. And yeah, they're shedding the fat. So they got rid of the likes of Kyle Juszczyk, Leonard Floyd, Jahan Hargrave, and Malik Collins. All these underperforming players. And then they let Dre Greenlaw, Hufanga, Aaron Banks, and Jalen Moore, and then Charvarius Ward go. And then the only people of note that they really signed, not many. Like Luke Farrell in the Jaguars, who? A backup tight end that no one really heard of before. But they're wasting $20 million on this. A 3-year deal on this. DeMarcus Robinson from the LA Rams on a 2-year deal. He was a reserve receiver behind Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Tutu Atwell. And probably the one that the faithful got really heated on. I made a lull on this. Mac Jones. The quarterback that we all so rejected. We all said no to 4 years ago, leading up to the 2021 NFL draft. We all said no to Mac Jones. And yet here we are, 4 years later. And the ownership, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, they get the quarterback that Kyle finally wanted. And that is Mac Jones. Mac Jones comes in as a backup quarterback. And it's unreal. It's unreal what's happening right now with the 49ers. I don't know if you want to call it a retool. I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild. I don't even know what to think of it right now. But maybe we can revisit the conversation once the draft rolls around. But it's just crazy the lack of real activity for this team. We can say that about any other team right now. But for the 49ers, I don't know, man. I just don't know. But that's it. It also makes them why, as we transition over to the early winners and losers of the offseason, it's why the 49ers are like the biggest loser of the offseason so far. I mean, we still got the draft, obviously, but it's still not a great week for them. It's still not a great week to be a fan of the faithful because, like I said, many of the core players like Hufanga and Greenlaw, they're gone. And then the Niners didn't make any moves because of the limited cash flow. And, Brock Purdy and his agent, their greedy asses, unfortunately, coming to light, which is sad. And now they have to bring in a new backup quarterback in Mac Jones, the same Mac Jones that, like I said, we all rejected 4 years ago, and now Kyle Shanahan finally gets his man 4 years later. And it's just unfortunate. It really is unfortunate how things are going because, well, we had no money. We had the most dead cap space in the NFL, which means, yeah, pretty much money being spent on players that are on other teams. And yeah, here we are. Are we even going to do any damage in 2025? Some of the other losers in this free agency period so far include the Seahawks, who also seem to have change in the air in the Emerald City, which could be very wicked change. Because, well, they did away with their top 2 receivers and their quarterback in Geno Smith. And they overpaid one in Sam Darnold, who had one good season in Minnesota, and we don't know if he'll have the same success as he did in Minnesota. So we'll see. We'll see how they do in the draft. And then the Houston Texans trading away 2 of their starting offensive linemen. One, they happen to be their top left tackle, a top tier left tackle. A very questionable move. Now, they can turn that around. Nick Caserio, specifically, could turn that around with the offensive line, like I said much earlier, being a top priority in this upcoming draft. Looking at the winners, on the other hand, obviously the biggest one being the Chicago Bears. Very aggressive in their approach to the offensive line. And they got exactly what they wanted with that new big 3 in the interior. Now, I'm not sure if they want to address the other spots and add more depth to the offensive line in the draft, but the interior at least is a major upgrade for Caleb Williams because that offensive line was a mess. And in my opinion, I still believe that they should address some parts of the offensive line in the draft. Probably not with their first pick, but maybe in the later rounds of the draft. But hey, I'm no GM. I'm just giving you suggestions as a filthy casual fan. Meanwhile, the Patriots were another big winner of the free agency so far because they were aggressive as well in the trenches, just on the other side of it. And then you also got an aggressive approach on defense with a solid addition of Robert Spillane. So when you look at their defense on paper right now, they should be much better next season. And then you look at the Buffalo Bills, the defending AFC East champions. Despite not having much money to spend, they still got themselves back in the green with those extensions to Josh Allen, Greg Rousseau, and then they still got solid role players like Joey Bosa and Larry Ogunjobi to help out Rousseau in the front 4. The passing defense still needs work, though. I believe they'll do that in the draft. And maybe some bargain bins that are left out there. And if they work on that, I believe the Bills can be in good shape to finally ease some pressure off of Josh Allen. So after all that, yeah, this is where we stand. With a month out in the NFL draft, and then a couple months out before training camp, and then several months out before the start of the regular season. So this is only the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. This is only the beginning. The new league year has officially rung in. Ding, ding. But the big moves are already happening. We're already in phase 1. Phase 1, step 1, whatever step it is of the 2025 NFL season. And yeah, free agency was just the start of it. And I was already looking forward to next season, like 2 months ago. But yeah, this free agency period, like pretty much like every time the NFL season ends, it always makes me ready for the next one and the next one and the next one. But again, free agency is always a reminder that you're ready for football once again when it hits September. And this was, again, no different. But I'm also ready for the NFL draft too. And yeah, we'll see what happens there with all these teams and what they will do and what they won't do. But for now, that was your roundup, your very lengthy roundup of what happened in free agency for all these teams and what they did and what they didn't do and what they should still need to do in the offseason. So let me know your thoughts on all these moves for all these teams in free agency so far. And what do you think they need to do going forward for the rest of this offseason going into the draft. And yeah, as we head towards 6 months out for the regular season. So let me know. Let's have a conversation about it. And yeah, on to the NFL draft. And like I said, we'll continue on with our 2024 NFL season team recaps in the next episode as we wrap it up with the second half of our team recaps going forward. So anyway, that's it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I'm your filthy casual host, Bill Lasagna. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 257 of this icy yet spicy podcast for your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And until I see you, when I see you in the next episode, peace out.